The thunderstorm cracked open the evening sky as Rosalind Harlow clutched her father's weather journal to her chest, the rain pounding against the roof of the stagecoach like angry fists. It was 1876, and she was returning to Silverdale, a place she'd sworn never to set foot in again, especially not after the way things had ended with Wade Harrison 4 years ago. The coach lurched to a halt outside the only hotel in town, and Rosalind took a deep breath before stepping out into the muddy street. Silverdale hadn't changed much in 4 years, the same dusty main street lined with wooden buildings, the same saloon where raucous laughter spilled into the night, the same townsfolk who now stared at her as if they'd seen a ghost. "Miss Harlow?" The hotel owner, Mr. Peterson, recognized her immediately, his bushy eyebrows shooting up in surprise. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." "I didn't expect to be back," she replied, her voice steady despite the tumult in her chest. "My father's affairs need settling." Mr. Peterson's face softened. "Heard about Thomas. Good man, your father. Town wasn't the same after you both left." Neither was she, Rosalind thought, but kept it to herself as she secured a room for the week, hopefully long enough to sell her father's property and leave Silverdale forever. Again. "The Harrison Ranch has expanded," Mr. Peterson commented casually as he handed her the key. "Wade's one of the biggest cattlemen in the territory now." Rosalind's fingers tightened around the key. "I'm not here about Wade Harrison." "Course not," Mr. Peterson said, though his eyes told her he didn't believe a word. "Rooms at the top of the stairs, first on the right. Same one you had when you stayed here as a girl." That night, sleep evaded Rosalind as memories flooded back of summer days spent riding across open plains, of stolen kisses behind the schoolhouse, of Wade's eyes, blue as the Montana sky, filled with promises he couldn't keep. The next morning dawned clear after the storm, the air fresh with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Rosalind dressed in her most practical traveling suit, a deep blue that matched her eyes, and pinned her chestnut hair into a severe bun. She was 24 now, no longer the lovesick girl who'd left with a broken heart. Her father's lawyer, Mr. Godfrey, received her in his office with sympathy and a stack of documents. "Your father's ranch is the largest piece of the estate," he explained, adjusting his spectacles. "Unfortunately, there's a complication." Rosalind steeled herself. "What kind of complication?" "Thomas took out a loan against the property before he passed. The bank's calling it due in 30 days. "How much?" When Mr. Godfrey named the sum, Rosalind felt the floor tilt beneath her. It was more money than she could possibly raise in a month. "There is one option," Mr. Godfrey said carefully. "Wade Harrison has expressed interest in the property. It borders his land to the north." Of course he had. Wade had always been ambitious, always looking to expand his holdings. She remembered how that ambition had hardened him, transformed the laughing boy she'd loved into a man she barely recognized. "I'll think about it," she said, though inside she was already refusing. She would find another way. She had to. The ranch looked smaller than she remembered, the fence posts leaning in places, the barn roof in need of repair. But the view from the porch still stole her breath. Rolling grasslands stretching to distant mountains, the kind of vastness that made a person feel both insignificant and infinite. Inside, everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. Her father had moved to Denver after her mother died, renting the place to a series of tenants who clearly hadn't cared for it as he had. Rosalind ran her fingers along the mantel, remembering how her mother used to place wildflowers there in the spring. A floorboard creaked behind her, and Rosalind whirled around, her heart leaping to her throat. Wade Harrison stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking like he'd stepped right out of her memories, but harder somehow, more weathered. The years had etched lines around his eyes and mouth, and the golden stubble on his jaw was flecked with silver now. But those eyes, they were still the same impossible blue, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Heard you were back," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. Rosalind lifted her chin. "And you thought you'd just walk into my house?" Door was open. A ghost of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. Old habits. They'd been friends long before they'd been anything else, inseparable since childhood until everything changed. "What do you want, Wade?" He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture so familiar it ached. "Came to pay my respects. Your father was a good man." "Yes, he was." Rosalind swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Thank you." An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and ancient hurts. "Godfrey tells me you're interested in buying this place," she finally said. Wade nodded. "Makes sense. It connects to my north pasture." He paused, then added, "I'd pay fair market value. I haven't decided to sell yet." His eyebrows rose. "You planning to stay and run it yourself?" The question hit a nerve. No, she wasn't planning to stay, couldn't stay. Not with the memories that haunted every corner of this town. Not with him so close. "I'm exploring my options," she said stiffly. Wade studied her for a long moment, as if trying to read something in her face. "You've changed, Rosalind. It's been 4 years. People change." "Not that much." His eyes softened a fraction. "I still see that stubborn girl who wouldn't back down from a challenge." She turned away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. "That girl is gone, Wade. She grew up." He nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "We all did, Rose. Some of us the hard way." He moved toward the door, then paused. "If you need anything while you're here, my offer stands. Not just for the ranch." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of leather and pine in his wake. That night, Rosalind couldn't sleep. She paced the creaking floorboards of her childhood home, her mind racing. The loan her father had taken out was substantial money he'd needed for medical care in his final months. Selling to Wade would be the simplest solution, but the thought of him owning the land where she'd grown up, where she'd first learned to ride, first kissed a boy, first kissed him, was unbearable. By morning, she'd made a decision. She would try to run the ranch herself, at least long enough to pay off the loan. It was madness. Perhaps a single woman with no experience in ranching beyond what she'd observed as a girl, but she couldn't bear to give up without trying. The bank manager, Mr. Holloway, looked skeptical when she laid out her plan. "Miss Harlow, running a cattle operation isn't like keeping house," he said, peering at her over his spectacles. "It requires experience, manpower, and capital." "I have some savings," Rosalind countered, though she knew it wasn't nearly enough. "And I can hire help." "Good ranch hands are hard to come by these days," Mr. Holloway said. "Most work for the big operations like Harrison's." Everything circled back to Wade. It was maddening. "I'll find a way," she insisted. Mr. Holloway sighed. "Your father was a friend, so I'll be straight with you. That loan comes due in 4 weeks. If you can't pay it, the bank will have no choice but to foreclose, and then Mr. Harrison will likely get the property anyway for a fraction of what he's offering you now." Rosalind left the bank with a heavy heart but a determined spirit. She would find a way to make this work. She had to. The town mercantile was her next stop. She needed supplies if she was going to stay at the ranch, and information about who might be available for hire. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, greeted her warmly. "Rosalind Harlow, as I live and breathe, you're the spitting image of your mother." Rosalind smiled, touched by the comparison. Her mother had been beautiful and kind, beloved by everyone in Silverdale. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I need some supplies and perhaps some advice." As she gathered essentials: coffee, flour, sugar, bacon, she inquired about potential ranch hands. Most of the able-bodied men work for Wade or the mining company now, Mrs. Abernathy said, echoing Mr. Holloway. Though Billy Thompson's boy might be looking for work. And there's always Hank Miller, though he's getting on in years. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Rosalind thanked her and was about to leave when Mrs. Abernathy called her back. There's something you should know, the older woman said, lowering her voice. Wade Harrison never married, you know. Folks say he's been waiting all this time. Rosalind's heart skipped a beat. Waiting for what? Mrs. Abernathy gave her a knowing look. For who, you mean? Rosalind shook her head. That's nonsense. Wade Harrison doesn't wait for anyone. The Wade she'd known had been impatient, always rushing toward the next horizon, the next opportunity. People change, Mrs. Abernathy said, echoing Rosalind's own words from the day before. Not that much, Rosalind thought as she loaded her purchases into the wagon she'd rented. Not enough to matter. The next few days were a flurry of activity as Rosalind took stock of the ranch. The house needed repairs, but was structurally sound. The barn and corrals were in worse shape, with several broken fence rails and a section of roof that leaked badly. The cattle, what remained of her father's once sizable herd, numbered only about 50 head, scattered across the northern pasture. She managed to hire young Josh Thompson and old Hank Miller, as Mrs. Abernathy had suggested. Between them, they had enough knowledge to begin making repairs and rounding up the cattle, but Rosalind knew it wouldn't be enough for a viable operation. On her fourth day back, she was struggling to fix a broken section of fence when a shadow fell across her work. You're doing it wrong. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. I don't recall asking for your opinion, Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison was my father, Wade said, dismounting from his horse with fluid grace. And that post will come loose again at the first hard rain if you set it like that. He took the mallet from her hands, their fingers brushing briefly a touch that sent an unwelcome spark up her arm. With a few expert movements, he demonstrated the proper technique, driving the post deeper and at a slightly different angle. There, he said, handing the mallet back. That'll hold. Rosalind reluctantly admitted to herself that he was right. Thank you, she said stiffly. Wade looked around at the dilapidated fencing. You planning to rebuild the whole thing yourself? I've hired help. Josh Thompson and old Hank? Wade raised an eyebrow. Heard about that in town. They're good men, but not enough for what you're trying to do here. And what exactly am I trying to do, Wade? Rosalind challenged, wiping sweat from her brow. Something impossible. His voice was gentle, almost sad. You can't run this place alone, Rose. Not in time to pay off that loan. She bristled at his use of her old nickname. I'm not alone. I have Josh and Hank. And 50 head of half-wild cattle that haven't been properly tended in months. Wade gestured toward the distant pasture. Even if you round them all up, the price of beef is down. You won't get enough to cover what you owe. I'll find a way, she insisted, echoing her words to the banker. Wade studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. All right. All right what? I'll help you. Rosalind stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You'll what? Help you, he repeated. I've got men to spare. We'll get your fences fixed, round up your cattle, get things in order. Why would you do that? Suspicion colored her voice. You want this land. Wade's eyes hardened slightly. Yes, I do. But I want it fair and square, not because you failed. So this is about your pride. Maybe it's about giving you a fighting chance. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. My men will be here at dawn tomorrow. Your choice whether to accept the help or not. Before she could respond, he rode off, leaving Rosalind staring after him, the mallet still clutched in her hand. That evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Rosalind weighed her options. Pride told her to refuse Wade's help, to prove she could do this on her own. Practicality argued otherwise. With only 3 weeks left to pay the loan and only 2 hired hands, the task before her was nearly impossible. The next morning, she was up before dawn, dressed in her father's old work clothes, which she'd altered to fit her smaller frame. Her hair was braided tightly, and she wore a wide-brimmed hat against the sun. Wade arrived with 4 men, all experienced ranch hands who tipped their hats respectfully to Rosalind. "Miss Harlow," Wade greeted her formally, no trace of the familiar warmth he'd shown the day before. "These are my best men, Carlos, Ethan, Jim, and Ben. They'll follow your lead." Rosalind nodded, oddly touched by his deference to her authority on her own land. "Thank you for coming. We need to repair the north fence line and round up the cattle in the upper pasture." The men got to work without complaint, and Wade himself pitched in, his strength and expertise evident in every task he undertook. Rosalind worked alongside them, determined to prove she wasn't afraid of hard labor. By midday, they'd made significant progress on the fence line. Rosalind brought out a lunch of cold biscuits and ham, which the men gratefully accepted. Wade sat slightly apart from the others, his eyes frequently straying to where Rosalind was distributing food. "You work hard," he commented when she brought him a plate. "Always did." "Some things don't change," she replied, thinking of Mrs. Abernathy's words. "No," he agreed, his eyes lingering on her face. "Some things don't." The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken words. Then one of the men called a question about the afternoon's work, breaking the spell. The days fell into a pattern. Wade and his men would arrive at dawn, work until dusk, and then return to his ranch, leaving Rosalind with Josh and Hank to handle the night watch. Gradually, the property began to transform. Fences mended, the barn roof repaired, cattle rounded up and counted. Despite her initial reservations, Rosalind found herself looking forward to Wade's arrival each morning. There was a competence about him, a quiet authority that inspired confidence. He rarely gave direct orders, instead making suggestions or asking questions that led to the best course of action. It was so different from the impetuous young man she'd known, the one who'd made plans without consulting her, who'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd forgotten about the heart he was breaking in the process. One evening, as the sun was setting and the men were packing up to leave, a sudden commotion erupted from the northern pasture. The cattle were bellowing in distress, and Josh came riding in at a gallop. "Wolves!" he shouted. "Attacking the herd!" Wade immediately took charge. "Carlos, Ben, get your rifles. Jim, Ethan with me. Miss Harlow, stay here." "It's my herd," Rosalind protested, already reaching for her father's old Winchester. Wade's eyes flashed with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Then stay behind me." They rode hard toward the northern pasture, where the frightened cattle were running in confused circles. In the fading light, Rosalind could make out dark shapes darting among the herd, at least 3 wolves, maybe more. Wade raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The wolves paused, then one lunged toward a calf that had become separated from its mother. Without hesitation, Rosalind raised her own rifle and fired, the shot going wide but startling the wolf enough that it retreated. The men spread out, firing warning shots that eventually drove the wolves back into the forest. One calf had been injured, but not fatally. As Rosalind knelt to examine it, Wade appeared at her side. "You're a good shot," he said, surprising her. "I missed. You didn't aim to kill." He helped her bandage the calf's leg. "You never did like taking a life, even a predator's." Rosalind glanced up at him, startled that he remembered such a detail about her. "They're just doing what comes naturally." "So are we," Wade said quietly. his eyes meeting hers in the gathering dusk. Protecting what's ours. The word ours hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. For a moment, Rosalind could almost believe they were partners in truth, not just temporary allies. The moment was broken when Carlos called out that the herd was secure. Wade helped Rosalind to her feet, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "We should post a night watch," he said. "Wolves might come back." "Josh and Hank can take turns," Rosalind said. Wade shook his head. "I'll stay too. We'll rotate, give each man a few hours of sleep." Rosalind wanted to protest that it wasn't necessary, that she didn't need his protection, but the practicality of the suggestion won out. "I'll take a shift too. Rose, it's my ranch, Wade. My responsibility." He studied her face in the moonlight, then nodded. "Third watch. After midnight. I'll wake you." That night, Rosalind tried to sleep in her childhood bedroom, but rest eluded her. She kept thinking about the way Wade had looked at her in the pasture, about his immediate response to the threat to her cattle, about how, despite everything, she still felt safer knowing he was out there in the darkness, keeping watch. True to his word, Wade knocked softly on her door after midnight. Rosalind was already dressed, having given up on sleep hours earlier. "All quiet," he reported as they walked together toward the barn. Carlos spotted the wolves once, far to the north, but they didn't approach. The night was clear, the stars brilliant in the vast Montana sky. They climbed to the hayloft, which offered a good vantage point of the northern pasture. Rosalind settled beside Wade, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. "Thank you," she said after a comfortable silence, "for staying, for helping." Wade's profile was strong in the moonlight, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Couldn't let you face wolves alone. I meant with the ranch. You didn't have to help." He turned to look at her then, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Yes, I did." Rosalind's heart quickened. "Why?" Wade was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then softly, "Because I've regretted letting you go every day for 4 years." The confession hung in the still night air. Rosalind felt as if she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. "You didn't let me go," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You pushed me away. I was a fool." Wade's voice was rough with emotion. "I thought I needed to build something worthy of you first. I didn't realize what I was losing in the process." Memories flooded back their last argument, his insistence that he needed more time to establish himself before they could marry, her ultimatum, his refusal. The pain of it still felt fresh, even after all this time. "You became so hard, Wade, so focused on your ambitions that you couldn't see anything else. Anyone else. I see you now, Rose." He reached out slowly, as if afraid she might pull away, and touched her cheek. "I've always seen you, even when you were gone." The tenderness in his touch undid her. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away, unwilling to let him see how deeply he still affected her. "It's too late," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Wade didn't press. He simply returned his gaze to the horizon, respecting her need for distance. They finished their watch in silence, the unspoken words between them louder than anything they might have said. The following days brought a new tension to their work together. Wade was unfailingly polite, respectful of her authority on her land, but Rosalind caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice his eyes filled with a longing that mirrored her own hidden feelings. The cattle drive was scheduled for the end of the week, a small operation by most standards, but crucial for Rosalind's plan to pay off the loan. With 50 head of cattle at current market prices, she would still fall short, but it would buy her more time with the bank. The evening before the drive, Wade stayed late, going over the route with her one final time. They sat at her kitchen table, a map spread between them, their heads bent close as they discussed watering holes and potential hazards. The river's running high after the spring melt, Wade pointed out, his finger tracing the blue line on the map. We'll need to cross here, where it's wider but shallower. Rosalind nodded, all too aware of his proximity, of the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him. How long to reach Silver Creek from there? Half a day, if the weather holds. Wade looked up, his face inches from hers. Rose. Whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Mr. Godfrey, the lawyer, looking grave. Miss Harlow, I'm afraid I have bad news. He glanced at Wade, then back at Rosalind. The bank has moved up the due date on your father's loan. They're calling it in the day after tomorrow. Rosalind felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. I have 3 more weeks. Mr. Godfrey shook his head. There was a clause in the agreement, something about the bank's right to accelerate payment if certain conditions were met. I'm sorry, I should have caught it earlier. What conditions? Wade asked, his voice sharp. If the property showed signs of neglect or abandonment. Mr. Godfrey looked uncomfortable. The bank sent an assessor out last week. They've determined the property meets those conditions. That's ridiculous, Rosalind protested. We've been working day and night to repair everything. I know, and I'll argue your case, but legally they're within their rights. After Mr. Godfrey left, Rosalind sank into a chair, devastation washing over her. All their work, all her plans for nothing. There was no way she could get the cattle to market and return with the money by the day after tomorrow. Rose. Wade knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Let me help. Haven't you been helping? She said bitterly. What more can you do? I can buy the ranch. He held up a hand when she started to protest. Not from the bank, from you. Right now, for the full price we discussed. You'll have the money to pay off the loan, with plenty left over. It was the obvious solution, the one that had been staring her in the face all along. Yet something in her still resisted. Why would you pay full price when you could wait 2 days and get it for much less at auction? Wade's eyes were steady, honest. Because I don't want to win that way, and because I don't want you to lose everything again. Not because of me. It wouldn't be because of you, Rosalind said softly. It would be because I was too stubborn to see what was right in front of me. Wade's expression was unreadable in the lamplight. What do you see now, Rose? She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since she'd returned to Silverdale. The boy she'd loved had become a man, yes, hardened by responsibility and ambition. But there was something else there too. Something she'd been too hurt and angry to recognize before. A depth of feeling that had never faded, despite the years and the distance. I see someone who never stopped caring, she whispered, even when I thought he had. Wade's hands tightened around hers. I never stopped loving you, Rose. Not for a single day. The words she'd longed to hear for 4 years washed over her like a bomb. But there was still a barrier between them, one built of old hurts and misunderstandings. I need time, she said, to think about your offer, about everything. Wade nodded, releasing her hands and standing. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. He left her then, alone with her thoughts and the weight of the decision before her. Rosalind barely slept that night, her mind circling the same questions without finding answers. By dawn, she was no closer to a decision, but she knew she couldn't face losing her father's land without a fight. She was saddling her horse, determined to ride to town and confront the banker herself, when Wade appeared in the yard, accompanied by his men and a small herd of cattle, at least 30 head, all prime steers ready for market. What is this? She asked, bewildered. Your cattle drive just got bigger, Wade said, swinging down from his saddle. These are my best steers. Combined with yours, they'll fetch enough to pay off the loan and then some. Rosalind stared at him in disbelief. You're giving me your cattle? I'm adding them to the drive, Wade corrected. We'll sell them together under your brand. The money's yours. Wade, I can't accept. You can and you will, he said firmly. Consider it an investment in our future. Our future. The words sent a shiver of anticipation through her. And if there is no our future? Wade's eyes never left hers. Then it's payment for 4 years of regret. Either way, I need to give it, Rose. She recognized the stubborn set of his jaw, the same expression he'd worn as a boy when he'd decided on a course of action and wouldn't be swayed. It was both infuriating and endearing. All right, she conceded. But I'm paying you back. Every penny. A slow smile spread across Wade's face, lighting his eyes. I'm counting on it. The expanded cattle drive departed within the hour, making good time towards Silver Creek. Wade rode beside Rosalind at the head of the column, their conversation easier now, reminiscing about shared childhood adventures and catching up on the years they'd spent apart. Rosalind learned that Wade had expanded his ranch through hard work and smart investments, not through the ruthless tactics some had whispered about in town. He'd built a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock, and his cattle commanded premium prices at market. In turn, she told him about her life in Denver working as a schoolteacher, caring for her father in his final illness, the loneliness she'd felt even surrounded by the bustle of the growing city. I never fit there, she admitted as they made camp that evening. It was as if part of me was always back here. Wade added a log to their campfire, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. This land gets into your blood, becomes part of you. Yes, she agreed, watching the flames. But it wasn't just the land I missed. Wade's eyes found hers across the fire, a question in their depths. Before he could speak, one of the ranch hands called him away to deal with a lame horse, leaving Rosalind alone with her thoughts once more. They reached Silver Creek by mid-afternoon the next day, driving the combined herd into the holding pens near the railroad station. The cattle buyer, Mr. Simmons, was impressed by the quality of the stock. Fine animals, he commented, walking among the steers. Some of the best I've seen this season. When he named his price higher than Rosalind had dared hope, she glanced at Wade, who gave a slight nod. It was a fair offer, more than enough to pay off the loan. We accept, she said, extending her hand to seal the deal. Mr. Simmons counted out the money, and Rosalind immediately rode to the Silver Creek Bank to wire the funds to Silverdale, with Mr. Godfrey confirmed as the recipient. The transaction complete, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her father's land was safe for now, at least. Wade was waiting for her outside the bank, his tall figure leaning against a hitching post, hat tipped low over his eyes. It's done, she told him, unable to keep the relief from her voice. The money's been wired to Mr. Godfrey. Wade straightened, a smile breaking across his face. Congratulations, Miss Harlow. You're officially a successful cattle rancher. Rosalind laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. Hardly. I had quite a bit of help. You'd have found a way without me, Wade said, his voice serious now. You always were the determined one. They rode back to the cattle pens together, where the men were preparing for the journey home. The work was done, the crisis averted. Now came the harder part, deciding what happened next. That evening, they camped by a creek a few miles outside of town, the men setting up their bedrolls a discreet distance from where Rosalind and Wade sat by the fire. The night was clear, stars speckling the vast Montana sky, the air sweet with the scent of prairie grass. What will you do now? Wade asked quietly. With the ranch? Rosalind stared into the flames, considering the question. I don't know. I could sell it to someone other than you and go back to Denver. Is that what you want? She looked up at him, at the face that had haunted her dreams for 4 years. "No," she admitted. "But I don't know if I can stay either. Because of me." It wasn't a question. "Because of us," she corrected. "Because there's too much history, too many unresolved feelings." Wade was silent for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "What if we resolved them?" Rosalind's heart quickened. "How would we do that?" "By being honest." He moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I'll start. I love you, Rosalind Harlow. I never stopped loving you, not even when I was too proud and too blind to admit it. Losing you was the biggest mistake of my life, and I've spent 4 years paying for it." The raw honesty in his voice took her breath away. "Wade, let me finish," he said gently. "I know I hurt you. I know I became someone you couldn't recognize, hard, driven, focused on building something at the expense of everything else. But I've changed. Or maybe I've just remembered who I really am. Who I am when I'm with you." Tears welled in Rosalind's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I was hurt and angry for so long. I told myself I hated you, that I never wanted to see you again. And now," Wade's voice was barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "Now I'm afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that if I let myself love you again, you'll become that person once more, the one who put ambition above everything else." Wade took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I can't promise I won't be ambitious, Rose. It's part of who I am. But I can promise that nothing, no ranch, no cattle, no empire is worth losing you again. You're my home. You always have been." A tear slipped down Rosalind's cheek. "How do I know you mean that? How do I trust you again?" "You don't have to decide tonight," Wade said, wiping away her tear with his thumb. "Take all the time you need. I'll be waiting. And if I never can?" The pain that flashed across his face was answer enough, but he said, "Then I'll still be grateful for these days we've had, for the chance to see you again, to work beside you, to remember what matters most." Rosalind looked into his eyes, the eyes she'd dreamed of for 4 long years, and saw nothing but truth there. And something else. A love so deep and abiding it took her breath away. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Wade froze for an instant, then responded with a gentleness that broke her heart and healed it in the same moment. His hands came up to frame her face, as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever touched. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you're staying?" "I don't know," Rosalind admitted, "but I'm not leaving tomorrow." It was enough for now. They rode back to Silverdale the next day, the journey quieter than the outbound trip had been. Each was lost in thought, weighing the past against the possible future. Mr. Godfrey met them at the edge of town, his face alight with good news. "The bank received the wire. Your father's loan is paid in full, with the deed returned to your name." Rosalind smiled, though the victory felt somewhat hollow now. She had saved her father's land, but to what end? Would she stay and try to make the ranch profitable? Sell it and return to Denver? Or was there another option, one that involved the man riding silently beside her? That evening, after Wade and his men had returned to their own ranch, Rosalind sat alone on her porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky. The land stretched before her, beautiful and wild, a testament to her father's vision and hard work. Could it be hers too? Could she build a life here? A movement at the edge of her property caught her eye, a lone rider approaching at a steady pace. Even at a distance, she recognized Wade's tall figure, the distinctive way he sat a horse. He dismounted at the foot of the porch steps, removing his hat. "Evening, Miss Harlow. Mr. Harrison." She couldn't help but smile at the formality, after everything they'd shared. "I've been thinking," Wade said, climbing the steps to stand before her. About the future. About what comes next. Rosalind's heart quickened. And what conclusions have you reached? That I don't want to buy your ranch anymore. The statement caught her off guard. You don't. Wade shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. No. I want to marry the woman who owns it instead. Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. Wade, hear me out, he said, kneeling before her chair and taking her hands in his. I know it's sudden. I know we have things to work through, trust to rebuild. But I also know that I've wasted 4 years already, and I don't want to waste another day. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a ring, simple but beautiful, a single diamond catching the last rays of the setting sun. This was my mother's, he said softly. I've carried it with me every day since you left, as a reminder of what I lost through my own foolishness. I'm asking you to take it now not just as a promise of marriage, but as a promise that I will never again put anything above your happiness. Above us. Tears blurred Rosalind's vision, but she blinked them away, wanting to see his face clearly. You've thought this through? For 4 years, Wade affirmed. The only thing I've been sure of since the day you left is that if I ever got a second chance with you, I wouldn't waste it. Rosalind looked into his eyes, those impossibly blue eyes that had haunted her dreams, and saw nothing but sincerity and love. The hard, ambitious man she'd feared had been tempered by loss and regret, transformed into someone who understood what truly mattered. Yes, she whispered, the word catching on a sob. Yes, Wade Harrison, I will marry you. His face lit with such joy that it nearly broke her heart. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, and then gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Later, as twilight deepened into night and they sat together on the porch swing, arms entwined, Wade spoke her name softly in the gathering darkness. Rosalind. Just that her name, spoken with such tenderness that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. I'm here, she whispered back, resting her head against his shoulder. I just wanted to say it, he admitted. To believe that you're really here, that this is real. She twined her fingers with his, the ring on her finger catching the faint starlight. It's real. I'm not going anywhere. Neither am I, Wade promised. Not ever again. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Silverdale, with the whole town turning out to witness the union of 2 of its favorite children. Mrs. Abernathy wept openly, claiming she'd known all along they'd find their way back to each other. Mr. Godfrey gave the bride away in place of her father, and old Hank Miller played the fiddle for their first dance as husband and wife. The 2 ranches became one not through sale or acquisition, but through marriage and partnership. Wade moved into the Harlow homestead, which they renovated together, expanding it to accommodate the family they hoped to have. Their first child, a daughter named after Rosalind's mother, arrived the following spring, a strong, healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. A son followed 2 years later, then another daughter. The house rang with children's laughter, just as it had when Rosalind was young. The Harrison Harlow Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Wade's business acumen combined with Rosalind's careful planning made them one of the most successful operations in the territory. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations, and the challenges of raising a family on the frontier, always facing each trial together. On their 10th anniversary, Wade surprised Rosalind with a gift, a small silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children. To remind you of what matters most, he said as he fastened it around her neck. Of what I almost lost, and what I cherish every day. Rosalind touched the locket, then reached up to cup his face in her hands. You never became too hard to love again, she whispered. Even when I was afraid you might. Wade turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. Because you remind me every day who I really am, who we are together. That night, as they lay in the darkness of their bedroom, Wade spoke her name in that same soft way he had on the night he proposed Rosalind, as if it were a prayer, a benediction. And as she had then, she answered, "I'm here. Always?" he murmured, drawing her closer. "Always," she promised, sealing the vow with a kiss. In the years that followed, Silverdale grew from a small frontier town into a thriving community. The railroad came through, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Wade and Rosalind's children grew up strong and capable, each finding their own path, some staying to work the ranch, others venturing out into the wider world. Through it all, Wade and Rosalind remained constants in each other's lives, partners, lovers, friends. The hard lessons of their youth had taught them the value of what they'd found together, and neither ever took it for granted. On warm summer evenings, they could often be found on their porch swing, watching the sunset as they had on the night of their engagement. Sometimes they spoke of the past, of the 4 years they'd spent apart, of the twist of fate that had brought Rosalind back to Silverdale just when Wade had finally understood what he'd lost. More often, they spoke of the present and the future of their children and grandchildren, of the ranch that continued to thrive under their care. And sometimes they didn't speak at all. Sometimes, Wade simply reached for Rosalind's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers as naturally as breathing. And sometimes, in the deepening twilight, he would speak her name softly in the darkness, "Rosalind," and she would answer, as she always had and always would, "I'm here." Because she was, and because he was, and because they had learned that of all the treasures the wild Montana frontier had to offer, the greatest was the love they had nearly lost but found again, a love that had weathered separation and misunderstanding, pride and pain, to emerge stronger and truer than before. A love that would endure, like the land itself, through all the seasons of their lives together.